So, covering national cinema can be tricky, often due to the sheer volume of films and filmmakers. So for this video on Hong Kong, I'm only going to focus on one filmmaker whose work I love, Wong Kar-Wai. And in an attempt to create some sort of idea for how his work serves as a case study for Hong Kong, I'll be using Susan Hayward's taxonomy from her analysis on French national cinema to bring it all together. So Hayward's almost scientific method for features to be analysed when dealing with the idea of a national cinema includes 7 distinct points, the first of which being the narrative. In this case, Wong Kar-Wai serves as a particularly obvious outlier for his unique take on common narrative structure, typically constructing his films in a non-linear, almost episodic method, much like the work of Tarantino's Kill Bill or Pulp Fiction. This narrative style is probably most extreme in his film 2046, where the film is broken up into several different arcs, each presented to the audience in phases and in non-chronological order. Or in Chungking Express, where the film follows 2 lovesick police officers in Hong Kong, spending the first half of the movie with Cop 223, and in seemingly perfect sequence, transferring the second half of the film to Cop 663.
我跟他最接近的时候，我们之间的距离只有0.01公分，我对他一无所知。6个钟头之后，他喜欢着另外一个男人。
While it would be easy to group Hong Kong's national cinema under the idea that unorthodox narrative structure rules with an iron fist, there are exceptions of course, even for Wong Kar-Wai. Andrew Higson comments on the instability of the national as he puts it, saying tradition, heritage, indigeneity and the national are complex issues, and in many ways they're ideas that are just as fluid as the society or nation they're coming from, meaning something like accepted tendencies regarding how national filmmakers construct their narratives are always going to be subject to radical change, like here in Happy Together. Personally, I found this to be one of Wong Kar-Wai's most accessible films, because he breaks his own tradition of a formalist, complex narrative structure approach and opts for a more standard linear style. But aside from the examples of narrative form, I think it's important to reference the recurring content within Wong Kar-Wai's narratives. Central themes of love, lust, relationships and contemporary life in Hong Kong are visible everywhere, often overlapping between multiple different characters and story arcs. But the emotions tied to these themes are always made personable to the audience. One way Wong Kar-Wai puts the viewer on the side of one character is by not presenting the audience with an alternative. His 2000 film, In the Mood for Love, does this explicitly by presenting the tangled tales of 2 married couples, each dealing with the reality of infidelity. But we never actually see the faces of the perpetrators, only the faces of the victims. Another way he does it is through voiceover narration, often reinforcing one of these themes, usually loneliness, giving the audience an extra layer of context to his heavily visual style of filmmaking.
在1994年的5月1号，有一个女人跟我讲一声生日快乐，因为这一句话，我会一直记住这个女人。如果鸡也是一个罐头的话，我希望这块罐头不会过期。如果一定要加一个日子的話，我希望它是1萬年。
嗰日下晝，個女仔喺我屋企瞓着咗，本來我想叫醒佢，唔知點解我冇做到。
Another stylized feature to Wong Kar-Wai's narrative content is his use of storytelling motifs, often woven continuously into the timeline. He constantly refers back to carefully crafted segments, usually reinforcing something about a character's personality, habits, or desires. One great example can be seen in Happy Together. Wong Kar-Wai throughout the film constantly refers back to the Iguazu Falls, a natural spectacle in Argentina that the abusive couple of Lion Ho both express a longing to see. Sometimes these motifs aren't even visual at all. His use of recurring music during especially cinematic sequences of In the Mood for Love is enough to encapsulate the entire mood of the film. Next up is genre. Hayward argues that the concept of genre is embedded in a respective nation's contemporary history and that it is both synchronic and diachronic, meaning it provides a transparency in the present, but also reflected upon by the past and the future. Looking from the perspective of Wong Kar-Wai, a relatively healthy balance is pretty clear, romance being the most frequent generic choice, with non-platonic relationships and the problems associated with them often featured at the center of his stories. From a contemporary viewpoint, this choice seems fitting in a modern Chinese society, given the current gender imbalance the country faces and the problems it has imposed on individuals. Likewise, cases of his films actively avoiding a politically charged genre can be clearly seen. In Happy Together, a film released during the time of the city's transfer of sovereignty from the UK to China, takes place deliberately in Latin America, with only a handful of references to Hong Kong.
嗰朝睇電視，我先至發覺，原來香港同阿根廷喺地球嘅兩邊，唔知倒轉咗去香港會係點嘅咧？
我哋咪隨便表達呢啲嘅感覺或者係啲意見等等。近排忙唔忙一次？橫瀾島東北風2級，汕頭東南偏南風2級。商業一台行動中拘捕咗2個男人協助調查。
Next up are the codes and conventions. Discussing these attributes, she explores two different features of them. The first being the modes of production for national cinema. There are a couple of aspects that really jump out at you in terms of Wong Kar-Wai's production tendencies. One of them is a relatively low budget compared to American Hollywood alternatives. Chungking Express, for example, was made to look like a student film, as Wong Kar-Wai put it, and its budget reflected this production decision. Conversely, in the same year, in the US, top industry films were going in the opposite direction, with films like Speed costing up to $30 million to create. The second part to Hayward's analysis involves, as she puts it, the iconography of the image. And when discussing Wong Kar-Wai's heavily visual style of filmmaking, it's impossible to provide context without mentioning his most frequent and probably most important collaborations with cinematographer Christopher Doyle. Doyle's cinematography plays an enormous role in the most basic convention in film, the image. And as a result, his affinity for texture, colour, depth, and unique framing choices have shaped Wong Kar-Wai's image as a visually versatile director.
And it's usually that you come to somewhere and you smell it. There's something there, and sometimes it's light, you know. And you say, wow, look at the texture of this wall, you know. So we're not going to light it like, we're not going to put, boom, you know, like classic bullshit, you know, a street light, a street light, a street light. Or you are going to put a street light, a street light, a street light because you want this texture to come up. Those kind of things. So I think that if you go in that direction, then the film, as we said, becomes more organic. It pushes you. The choices you make push you in a certain direction, and that's what becomes what people call style.
There's also plenty of other visual tropes that are worth a mention for their frequent appearance in Wong Kar-Wai's films. One of them is the lack of stable camera shots. Watching Chungking Express, there doesn't appear to be any stable sequences shot on a tripod. He much prefers this fluid, free movement of handheld. Or in these action sequences, he uses a crazy slow shutter speed to create this sort of chaotic, disorganized look, which makes it even more striking when compared to the mellow smoothness the rest of the film provides. Next up is something a little different. Hayward's take on gesturality and morphology, specifically that of the body of an actor. In this case, it's not really something Wong Kar-Wai likes to do in his films, it's what he really cares about showing in his films. The best example of gesturality, taking the lead from a storytelling perspective, is from Maggie Cheung's performance from In the Mood for Love. Much of her character is expressed through movement as opposed to dialogue. Her loneliness and isolated state is mirrored perfectly by her movement on screen. She almost floats through the set, only providing physical contact when it really means something to her, or when she's looking to connect. Closely connected to this subject is Hayward's concept of the star as a sign. In the case of Hong Kong, this sign represents indigenous cultural codes or visual institutional metonymy. Particularly more effective for Wong Kar-Wai, as like some other filmmakers like Wes Anderson, he regularly works with the same cast, most obviously with Tony Leung, Faye Wong, and Maggie Cheung. These stars' profile on screen can and has been exaggerated by other elements that a filmmaker can control. One example is costume design. Maggie Cheung as Mrs. Chan wears 21 different, intricately designed keep-out close-fitting dresses that emphasize her fragile beauty both as a star and as a character in the film. Or Faye Wong, who had already created an eccentric diva image as a cantopop singer, accentuates this symbol by performing as equally eccentric characters. Finally, the last aspect of Hayward's analysis on national cinema I'd like to discuss is her concept of cinema of the center and cinema of the periphery. In one aspect, she writes about American Hollywood representing the center of the filmmaking sphere, and all other national cinemas acting as peripheries to be contrasted and referenced against. But she also uses the 2 points as opposites regarding the production aspect of filmmaking. Like previously mentioned, Wong Kar-Wai's unlikely visual tropes and generic choices acting as a periphery to more central and common practices. Looking back, whether it's Hong Kong or any national cinema, Hayward warns against being too reductionist when labeling national identities. So while this video essay tries to pick features and common practices of Hong Kong cinema, using Wong Kar-Wai as a popular case study, its versatility and adaptability should always be kept in mind.